Hey, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by Max Blumenthal of the Grayzone. And honestly, in a just sea of endless content, if you only have the bandwidth for one story to read today or this week, read this from the Grayzone and Max. I was just joking to you before we recorded. This is kind of like the espionage thriller that American filmmakers would never make because it makes America look too bad. So basically, I want you to unpack it. Julian Assange, as we know, still a political prisoner, has not been released even due to COVID concerns, which his lawyers wanted. His extradition hearing was bumped to later in the year, but by all intents and purposes, this is still kind of a show trial, and unless something changes, he's going to be extradited to the U.S. So you found a lot more spying than we even thought or knew was going on of Assange. Kind of a mix of the U.S. involvement and a mega Republican donor involved.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my story in the Grayzone, I think, should invalidate the indictment of Julian Assange and certainly his extradition to the U.S. I mean, if there were a fair democratic legal system, if we were dealing with international law or the U.S. Constitution, what you're seeing here is gross misconduct at the least and wanton international criminality being carried out under the watch of Mike Pompeo's CIA. Very likely that the latter case is what we're dealing with. And I just say very likely just to guard my ass legally, because it's just pretty damn obvious that that's what took place. Major crimes. I mean, not just secret spying on Julian Assange and his attorneys, journalists, U.S. citizens, even a U.S. member of Congress who, according to one of Julian Assange's lawyers, announced himself as an emissary of Donald Trump when he was spied on. These people had their phones opened. Pamela Anderson, the Canadian-American actress who's a friend of Assange and an advocate for him, had her Gmail account password stolen. Ecuadorian diplomats who were working at the embassy where Julian Assange was given asylum were spied on. The Ecuadorian government was the client of this small security firm called UC Global, and they were deceived, likely by the CIA, in order to install a system of cameras that spied on Julian Assange. Now, some of this has been out in Spanish language media. I mean, this is all from a Spanish high court case that I'll describe in a second. And so some of this has been reported in bits and pieces, but the role that Sheldon Adelson, the ultra-Zionist Republican mega donor, and his company, Las Vegas Sands, played as the apparent third party for the CIA, and the personnel who directed Adelson's executive security team, this element hasn't really been reported out, and the personnel haven't been named before. I got court documents, protected witness testimony from the Spanish High Court, and conducted some interviews and did research on my own to pull this piece together. And basically, the background for the trial will help your viewers and listeners understand the story. It basically started, first of all, with Julian Assange in 2012 taking asylum through the Ecuadorian government under the leftist president, Rafael Correa, at the embassy they had in London. So there was a small-time Spanish security firm run by a former Spanish Special Forces officer named David Morales that had the contract to first guard Correa's children, and then got the contract to guard the embassy just because they were based in the EU. It was tough for Ecuador and its SENAIN security services to get visas into London and go back and forth. So they just gave this guy the contract, and the contract was on behalf of Ecuador's SENAIN security agency to protect Julian Assange and the diplomatic personnel because the embassy was under siege. So you have CCTV cameras there that detect intruders. The cameras weren't there to pick up conversations and spy on Assange. But this guy Morales, he really wants to be the next Eric Prince. He wants to have this global army for hire that he can leverage into high-level political connections and be a real player. Basically turn his mercenary know-how into global elite status. So he heads off to alone without any of his, employees to a security fair in Las Vegas, held at the Sands Expo, I believe, which is owned by Sheldon Adelson, in 2016. And he's approached there by someone named Zohar Lahav, who is the Israeli director of Sheldon Adelson's executive protection team. And according to protected witness testimony in this Spanish high court trial, Lahav basically folded the relationship with Morales into some kind of CIA contract. Morales returns to Spain, to southern Spain, and starts bragging to his employees, we're going to be playing in the first division now. We're going to be playing in the big leagues, because he just got this major contract. And he said, we're going to be working on the dark side. Those were his words. He's even acknowledged that he said that. Who was he working on behalf of? According to two employees and a former business partner, American intelligence. And American intelligence was using Las Vegas Sands and Sheldon Adelson to basically cover the contract so that they had plausible deniability. The contract was to protect Adelson's $70 million yacht. And the funny thing is, Adelson already had a 24/7, 7-day-a-week massive security team to protect him and his family. So why did he need this additional security contractor? It became quite obvious when in 2019, after Julian Assange was arrested, former employees and a former business partner of Morales went to Assange's legal team and said, we have been participating in this gigantic campaign of criminal spying, robberies, assassinations were proposed. We want to expose what took place because it violated our contract and our own ethics. And so Assange's legal team went to a Spanish judge who enacted a secret investigation, which led to Morales's arrest. And through his arrest and company backup files, the court obtained, everything from Morales's call logs to company emails, really showing exactly what they did, which I describe in my piece because I'm working with those court files and more continually coming out. And as I said, it just shows a global campaign of illegal spying and worse, very likely conducted directly under the watch of Mike Pompeo, the former CIA director, who bragged, I was a CIA director. We cheated, we lied, and we stole. And I think that was a direct reference to this campaign.
And some of there's so many it seems to be crimes in there. One of them was they were spying on Assange and his lawyers' communications, so violating attorney-client privilege, which I'm not a lawyer, but I would think, like you said at the beginning, would give grounds to toss these cases, because how do you have a defense if your private, attorney-client privileged conversations are being spied on? There was also something of trying to get DNA off a diaper. I can't even believe I'm saying this, to try and see if it was Assange's son. Could you kind of go into some of those? Yeah.
Morales, everything Morales did, first of all, when I talk about him, this is the U.S. It's not like this Spanish mercenary really cared about the feces of Julian Assange's alleged child. But, so the U.S. intelligence obviously wanted to determine if Julian Assange had two secret children, and if one of his lawyers, Stella Morris, who has since, come out and recorded a very heartfelt testimony about how she mothered Julian Assange's children, was indeed the mother. So, a friend of Julian's was bringing the baby to the embassy, and then Stella Morris would come 2 hours later. So at one point, an IT specialist for UC Global working under Morales was ordered to fish a diaper of the baby out of the trash can at the embassy. And he said, this is insane. They also determined that you can't get DNA from feces and that it would have had to have been from the child's pacifier. So he actually confronted Stella Morris outside the embassy and said, look, stop bringing the kid here. They're trying to steal its diaper. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. You have in my piece, I disclose witness testimony, former UC Global workers talking about how Morales proposed breaking into the office of Baltasar Garzón, who is a renowned Spanish lawyer who was representing Julian Assange. He was the head of his legal team. 2 weeks after that proposal was made, 3 hooded men broke into Garzón's office, rifled through files, stole no valuables. This was widely reported in Spanish mainstream media. So the coincidence is pretty striking. In another case, Morales proposed leaving the embassy door open so that men could come in and kidnap Assange. Poisoning Assange was put on the table. His employees protested and said this is going in a really dangerous direction. And, you know, we can go into this a little bit more, but, you know, in December 2017, as the spying was, you know, reaching its most intense point with, you know, microphones placed in cameras, a magnetic microphone placed under a fire extinguisher to listen beneath the white noise that Julian Assange was using because he knew he was being spied on. Assange and his legal team and Ecuadorian diplomats were putting together a plan to get him diplomatic immunity from a friendly country, which would allow him to leave the embassy under the Vienna Convention, to legally leave the embassy. This really upset and frightened the Americans. And, you know, in addition to many measures they took to foil this, which I can describe in detail, an Ecuadorian diplomat, according to one participant in this plan, was robbed on his way back to Quito of his laptop while he was in an official government car by masked gunmen on a motorcycle. And that laptop contained all of the details of the plan. Somehow, while the plan was still a guarded secret, the U.S. ambassador to Ecuador, Todd Chapman, knew about it and was warning his, warning officials and people around the plan not to execute it. So this really highlights the role of American intelligence. And again, this is all being carried out through a contract with Adelson's Las Vegas Sands under the watch of CIA Director Mike Pompeo, who is a close ally of Adelson.
And, I mean, Adelson, I think, donated $30 million to Trump in 2016 or something like that.
Yeah, and he contributed, you know, tons more through various other means. I mean, he paid for the moving of the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I mean, he flies Trump people around on his private jets. But what's Adelson's interest? I mean, his number one interest is expanding his gambling and casino empire around the world. His number two interest is Zionism, ultra-Zionism, advancing the expansionist imperatives of apartheid Israel. He doesn't really care about Julian Assange. So it seems like this was just kind of done as a favor to the Trump administration. And the whole operation really began in earnest when Trump entered the Oval Office.
And I'm curious, because the indictment of Assange from Trump's DOJ, we all were under the assumption that this is all information Obama's DOJ had, and rightly didn't charge Assange with anything, but Trump, having the same information, charged him. Was there anything in terms of surveilling Assange and his lawyers' conversations that you kind of came across, that new information that Trump's administration might have gotten by surveilling them that they used to indict Julian Assange?
Well, it doesn't appear that they gathered any information that was in the indictment. I mean, the indictment mostly relates to Cablegate, which embarrassed the Obama administration. That's when it came out. But the timing of the indictment is what's critical here, and that's what I dig into in this piece. So I was talking about December 8, 2017, when Assange's legal team was trying to get him diplomatic immunity. It looked like it was going to happen. Basically, on December 20th, Romy Vallejo, who was the head of Ecuador's Senaín Security Services, visits the embassy to hash out the final stages of the plan. And when he enters the embassy, David Morales, who's the head of UC Global, the CIA asset, apparent CIA asset, orders his men to open Vallejo's phone, take his SIM numbers, basically to break into his personal mobile phone and open up all of the cameras, record the meeting. This is December 20th. December 21st is the day that federal prosecutors introduced the secret indictment of Julian Assange in a court in Virginia. So, I mean, the chronology, the timing says it all right there.
Mm-hmm. And you said a Spanish judge ordered the arrest of this
Morales, yeah.
Morales. So if that's a Spanish judge, has Julian Assange's attorneys brought this to the UK judges and officials that are overseeing his extradition? Or I assume they have. And have they gotten any response on that front?
Well, as far as I know, the Brits have attempted to prevent Assange from testifying in the Spanish case. And one thing I reveal in this piece towards the end, and I don't know if people have picked up on this, is that according to several witnesses in the recent hearing, extradition hearing in London of Julian Assange, where he was held in a glass box and, unable to confer with his lawyers, treated worse than Adolf Eichmann was in Jerusalem. There were several American Department of Justice officials who were seated behind the British prosecution team. And I produced photographs taken by a witness of those alleged US DOJ employees. The whole British case is basically being managed by the Americans and by the same people and same personnel with the same mentality, the spying campaign against Julian Assange. So they're trying to sabotage from the UK the Spanish case, which invalidates pretty much the entire U.S. indictment. So at the same time, the Spanish case is moving forward. David Morales is running around in the media denying that he did anything wrong. He's trying to play this case out in the media. But these are, I have court documents, emails, call logs, and one of the most significant components of the call logs are these constant calls from David Morales to Zohar Lahav, the Israeli-American executive, the director of Sheldon Adelson's executive security team. So the U.S. is completely ambiguous about what role they played here, but they've also run a parallel campaign in the media through places like The Guardian, through completely discredited reporters like Luke Harding, to try to claim that it was actually Ecuador that was spying on Julian Assange. And they're trying to deflect the whole thing. But the Spanish case will show, through this relationship with Las Vegas Sands and the constant communication with Lahav and Morales, I think that the CIA was managing this whole thing. And another, connection I made in this piece, which for whatever reason other journalists haven't made, is that this is not the first time Adelson's Las Vegas Sands apparently served as a front for the CIA. In 2010, there was a private intelligence report, which I obtained, that was classified at the time, produced by the gambling industry in Macau, which is in Chinese territory in the People's Republic of China, where Adelson has his gigantic Sands casino. And there were, according to this report, CIA and FBI agents were coming in there and surveilling Chinese officials who were gambling there to blackmail them, basically threatening to out them for spending large amounts of their public salary, losing it at the casino, and telling them, if you don't want this information out there, you have to become an informant and inform on the Chinese government for us. Classic blackmail operation. It was revealed in 2015. The Guardian reported on it. So all you have to do is make this connection. And then another connection I made was that the head of global security for Sheldon Adelson, Brian Nagel, was the former assistant director of the U.S. Secret Services and helped put into place, until he left public life in 2008, the cyber crime units that would have been on the front lines of the U.S. effort to take down WikiLeaks when WikiLeaks came online 2 years later in 2010. And Nagel has all the capacity and ability and experience to carry out the technical side of this spying operation. One of the most interesting emails that I found were instructions that Morales was providing to his employees in perfect English that were provided to him. He doesn't speak perfect English, on how to create like a separate spying feed on the cameras so the U.S. can see what's going on the cameras, and the Ecuadorian security service doesn't know. That email was sent from the Venetian, which is Sheldon Adelson's hotel in Las Vegas. It was sent from a static IP address on December 10th at the Venetian. So he was being handed these instructions on spying on behalf of the U.S. at Adelson's hotel. Who would be capable of providing him with those instructions over his shoulder? Somebody like Brian Nagel, who used to be in the U.S. government working with the intelligence community, who he even received a CIA Medal of Distinction. So I think the relationship here is very clear, and that relationship should invalidate the indictment.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.